Okay, here we are. Welcome back to our second lesson of the fan. So this is our historical weapon study for the next little while. Our goal, like we did with the sword set, is to learn a bit about the weapon over the next couple lessons, and then start to introduce a choily foot fan set. That will take you through a whole bunch of basics. It's got a bunch of really good fun stuff in it. Last we were talking about how it even has a diving front roll in it. So we'll address that. I'll get my mats out on one of the lessons when we get close to that. I will show you the theory of how to do the dive roll, and I will show you how not to do the dive roll and still do the form. There's also some really deep 360-degree spinning heel kick kind of thing from the ground, sweeping heel kicks. We'll try to modify a lot of that stuff as well for those who don't want to head to the ground, and those who do. It's a great workout to be kind of spinning around. So let's just take a second and warm up your wrists. So just kind of roll those wrists in and out. We're going to be doing some work with the fan today, and the other way. Good, and just a bit of a stretch up and to the other side, just so we're not starting completely cold. Let those arms rock from side to side. Good, and hips around one way and around the other. Good, just a bit more work on the hips from the inside to the outside. Good, from the outside to the inside. Good, and shake it out a little bit. Okay, so we were having a bunch of fun last week, learning a bit about the weapon that we're working on. We were talking a little bit about some of the possible historic reasons for the fan becoming a fighting weapon. One of the main reasons was it was in hand. So it was something that was a part of the era, and through many different countries, there's fan traditions, both in Japan. There's Korean fan traditions as well for the fighting. Ours happens to be coming from the southern system of Choi the Foot in China, and we were talking about how. When I bring this up to my students in the junior programs, they're always surprised to find out that men carried fans in China a lot too, and that they were a status symbol. That it was part of what was going on, but the artwork that was inside your fan, and particularly the poetry that was sometimes inside your fan, was the way to woo the girls with your awesome poetry inside your fan. I'd be like, oh, he's so sensitive, what a guy. And he's got such a grasp on his poetry, and they would just fawn all over them. No, it was also just air conditioning. So it was a way to have something. But what they discovered was, yes, there were people who turned this really, really further into a weapon by using steel that was closer to, or steel that would be used as a weapons grade steel. They would have done things like sharpen and point the ends a little bit on it and things of that sort. But mostly, a lot of people were carrying around just a bamboo style fan. But it still gave advantages in a street or self-defense conflict different than just using barehanded techniques. And so a lot of what you're looking at is also a way of studying edged weapons without having an edged weapon. So there's going to be a lot of cutting and thrusting that we were talking about last week. We were also talking about the use of the handle side, or the pommel side, for percussive style striking. So we looked at that a bit last week as well. And we talked about the advantages of having something solid in the hands for striking with. So it kind of walks that line between a percussive weapon and an edged weapon. You can learn, and there's always translations between percussive weapons and edged weapons. If we look at the Filipino martial arts, things start with a single stick, but mostly as a way to to learn how to move to things like knives and machetes. And so, like we were doing in the double-edged sword work, and like any edged weapon, there are really a basic cutting grid that you're looking to work on. And so that cutting grid that we were talking about last week is, we've got our X, so we've got our diagonals that we create in X, and we're talking about how we can cut down along that X. So we could, or strike along that X if we're talking percussive. So we've got diagonals that we are working with. And you can take a second if you want to kind of just get a feel for hitting on those dials. Now, when we're talking about percussive and cutting, typically if we're talking about cutting, that's when you're drawing through a little bit more because you want to touch and cut along. So there tends to be a continuous motion through. Whereas with percussive weapons, you have also a little bit of this idea of sort of smacking and returning. But that is still along those same lines. So you're either going to go from weapon side and be able to strike down and return, or cut right through where you're cutting right through. Same with non-weapon side, where you're crossing the body, where you're either going to be cutting through or you might be hitting and returning, to think about it percussively. So we've got our downwards X with either cut throughs or percussive style hits. And then we have the upwards on that X line. So you're coming up or you're coming up. Again, you've got a weapon side from hip to shoulder. You've got your opposite side, non-dominant side, from hip to shoulder. So you could be hitting and returning. You could be hitting and returning, or you could be cutting through. You can be going up and down the same line. So you could be hitting up in one direction and hitting back down on the other. You could be hitting one way and coming back the other. So you can be working on this line. You can be working downwards X's. You can be working upwards X's. So let's just take like 30 seconds here. Now, what do we do with this opposite hand? Typically, what we want to do with that opposite hand is not lose awareness of it. So when we were talking about it from the sword set, we were making our gim fingers and stuff like that as a way to keep us aware, and it was kind of connected. The same thing we're going to want is to know where our opposite hand is. So one of the places that's kind of the safest to keep an opposite hand, particularly if this is turning into a situation where you've got edged weapons, is to turn the palm in slightly and keep it around the sort of center of your body. So you can be working your angles here, and this hand isn't really drifting that much. It's kind of staying in place. We don't typically want to turn our wrists out to reach in a knife situation, in a short bladed situation. We don't want to reach too often with this side so we don't get cut across the pulse points. We typically want to take whatever damage we're going to take, we want to take it on the back of the hand. So that means this hand is going to be kind of sitting inside. Okay, so we had our X's. We've been working those for the last minute or so. We also said that we would have our plus sign. So that means we're going to have horizontals, where we're working on a horizontal plane. And I hate to say it, this is one of the techniques that gets used a lot in knife, where you're opening up the lower abdominal area. So you get these horizontals with the knife right across the lower abdominal area or across the throat, places like that. And again, you've got a weapon side movement. We're coming across to strike. You have from the opposite side, we are rolling back and striking. So again, just for 30 seconds or so here, think about that. Notice I'm still kind of thinking about keeping this hand here. Now, eventually we might start checking with that other hand and reaching in or parrying or tapping, but it's also just a good habit to know where it is. So you got horizontals. And again, you can be working these from different angles. Then we have our verticals. So same side arm. Now, let's go back to horizontals again. We didn't talk about the percussive part. So we have the cut through aspect, but then you've also got this idea of snap and return. So you're hitting, you might be just smacking to the temple, to the side of the neck, because we're thinking of a percussive weapon. And then we had the verticals. So we're coming down and returning. We can be hitting, we can be doing those verticals on the weapon side. We can be doing those verticals on the non-weapon side. if you turn a little bit more to your lateral, then you get a better chance of throwing verticals upwards. It's a little harder to work these upwards verticals. You can do them with that leg back, but it's going to be easier to do these as that leg comes forward. Now you're going to see in the choice set that there's quite a bit of turning to the lateral, and this is a way of increasing my range for both thrusting and some of my cuts, but also profiling my internals away. So I'm presenting rib cage and things rather than as much soft tissue. Now, I forgot to, at the beginning, we were talking about the grip on this being really important, and that we want to make sure that what we're doing is presenting our edges, not the flats. So we're talking about one of the things it'll take a while to get comfortable with is getting this idea of a pinched grip between the thumb and the forefinger, so you can kind of pinch and wrap so that you're holding it. So at the edges, if you're kind of punching out with this weapon, you'd be punching with your edges so that you can hit with those edges, because if you test out your weapon itself, you're going to find that on the flats, it's not very strong and will tend to break. On the edges where it has its power. So make sure you're doing that. And we're always leaving a little bit of space at the bottom. So just wanted to make sure I went back to that so people weren't slapping with their weapon. So we had our diagonals, our horizontals, our verticals. So we're working on those ideas. Then we also talked last week, and I don't want to spend too much time, I want to move on a little bit, but these are the foundations. They're the foundations, no sense in moving through with the weapon. So we talked about how we can be working a lot of those same angles, but now using the hammer fist side of the hand so that we are using a point load. And this is actually, from self-defense perspective, going to be one of the more useful things in that close range where self-defense might be existing and you've got the fan, where we are point loading with the end of the fan. And again, we have straight down, we have our horizontals, and we have those diagonals as well. And those can be coming from lots of different directions where we're kind of pounding in. We also talked about how we could use that to the back. So we can be, someone's grabbing from behind, so we put a point load of the weapon backwards or over the shoulder. We also said that you could make a vertical where you came across and up from underneath. So you could be hitting down, but you could also come across and hit from underneath. So again, just take a minute and start to think about ways you can pound in with the end of the weapon. Tip of the weapon right to the bridge of the nose, to the temple, to the side of the neck. Those are the kind of targets you're going to be looking for, sticking it into the floating ribs. Up into the armpit is a particularly good self-defense position to be using a blunt point into the armpit area, down onto the solar plexus. And then we talked about, of course, point loads on the front end of the weapon as well. So we can be point loading down, and this would be representing thrusts. So we could thrust upwards with this, we could thrust downwards with this, we could wrap in from the outside, we could hit around and in from the opposite side. Again, if you're doing the double-edged sword, it's the same patterns. Downwards thrusts, upwards thrusts, straight thrusts, side thrusting, down and in. There's a lot of ways that we can thrust. So now we've got percussive and cutting on our diagonals and our horizontal vertical line. We have point load striking we can do with the end of the weapon. So we're hitting in lots of different directions with the end of the weapon. And we have these thrusting kind of motions. We briefed along opening and closing the fan last week as well. So let's do a little review on that. So typically, if you're holding the fan with your edges in the right direction, you're going to find your thumb is sitting just, I'm getting close enough here, just along the edge of the handle. And what you want to be able to do is pull that back slightly towards you. And you're going to pinch it between the finger and the thumb so that the rest of the weapon wants to release downwards. So if you're in your fighting position, you kind of have to let it go into your fingers a little, and then you're going to peel that back, and I'm using my index finger here to set myself up. Now, as we were talking about for closing it, we want to roll back and flick back. So you're flicking it out, you're rolling it back, flicking it out, and you're rolling it back. Now, we also in the set are going to try to do this on the horizontal plane. So this one's a little bit more on that vertical plane, where we're heading it down and up. But we also want to be able to cut across on the horizontal and open up the weapon and close the weapon on a bit more of that horizontal plane. It's almost like throwing a sideways frisbee, but holding on to it. Now, I had a question from somebody last week saying, I was struggling a bit with the grip. Once I open the fan wants to close. And so that's a little bit of, the technical term is fiddle faddle. You have to kind of change your grip so that you're then kind of allowing your hand to shift a little, so that you'll notice that my pinky here is kind of helping to hold, and my fingers are helping to hold it one way while I'm still pinching in my finger and thumb here. So I'm helping to splay the fan, and I'm also compressing it. I'm squeezing it together so that I can swing it in lots of different ways. And now these are going to mimic the cuts again. So we're going to have cutting one direction, cutting the other direction, cutting down, cutting back, cutting on that horizontal range. One of the things we're going to see in this set is kind of coming up on diagonals and down on diagonals, but there's also going to be thrusting with these edges. Now, this is where we get to the idea that sometimes these edges were sharpened along here, but even still, if you were to take bamboo, small bamboo pieces and drive them towards somebody's throat or face, you might not necessarily, you might break your fan in the end, but if they're releasing you, that's getting you out of the situation. So we've got these now cuts. Now we've got this kind of splayed hand position, and we want to release that position so that we can come back to our initial fighting grip. So we have to go from one to the other. We have to be able to go from opening the fan and using the fan to closing the fan and using the fan. So without a fan, this isn't going to be a very exciting part of the class. But as you get a fan, you'll be able to do more of this and play with more. This is kind of the fun part of working with the fan. Now, one of the other things the fan was used for, and you're going to see it a lot in the set as well, is this idea, where I open the fan and I do these kind of arcs with the fan, up and over. And mostly these are like this. Hey, look over here. Wham. And then I'm going to kick or hit you with the opposite limb. So you've got this kind of distraction idea. Even just opening the fan to the side and catching somebody looking over at the fan is going to give you opportunities to start to hit with the opposing limb. So that's one of the ways the open fan will be used. I've also seen the open fan being used like this, so that you can block vision and then strike from behind that blocked vision. So you can use the distraction ability of the fan that way as well, where it's just kind of in the person's face for a second, and then you're striking low, or your fist is behind the fan. So as you move the fan, you're punching or palm healing from behind it. Okay, so that's a lot of our grip stuff. That gives us opening and closing the fan. That gives us our diagonals, our horizontals, our verticals, both with the pommel, with the edges. We have thrusting with the tip, and we also have this idea of cutting with the open fan. There is also thrusting with the open fan, thrusting with the open fan, where you're kind of jamming it in and towards somebody. So we'll look at turning over and pressing. Those are going to be things. And we said that a lot of this work is going to be done with a bit of a lateral stance to kind of protect the insides and increase your reach a little bit. It's also just typical of the Choi system liking to be in that, moving through that lateral position. Okay, so let's have a look at another concept that's going to show up in the set, and that is parries and deflections. And that's going to follow the same base as most single hand weapons will. So we're going to have our walls. So we're going to have a wall over here. We're going to have a wall over here. Boom, boom. We can be using either side of the edges to create our deflections. So we might be deflecting on this side. We might be turning that over. But again, like the hits, we don't want to start deflecting on the flats. Because if we put that flat up there and pressure comes in on it, again, our weapon's probably going to fall apart. So we want to be able to feel, and if you're using a ruler or something, you'll really feel that too. If you press on the thin edge of the ruler, lots of strength. Turn it to the flat, it's going to snap quite quickly against pressure. So high wall, high wall. So we've got this idea, and we have to turn our edges to face in the direction of impact. You can use the back edge, and we will see that in the set where we're going to deflect with the back edge of the weapon before thrusting or doing other techniques. Low walls. So again, edges down. We can go low to the outside. We can push to the outsides. So again, we've got these kind of areas where we're deflecting. High wall can be up with the tip down. It can be with the tip up. So we can be deflecting here. We can be deflecting there. Tip up, tip down. So you're creating these places where you're putting the weapon in the way. And particularly if you were with a fan and the other person was using an edged weapon, you would much rather get your weapon to engage with their possible blade than your wrists and your arms. So you're sacrificing the fan in your hand to taking the cuts. So walls are a typical pattern for deflections, whether it's with arms, and roofs are another way. So we get this kind of triangulation from the top of the head and down. So we can roof over here. We can roof over here. So we've got this idea of catching on the angles a little bit and deflecting, so we can end up with cuts. I'm sure as people with stick experience have way more fluidity and knowledge of these kind of walls and roofs than I do. So one side, other side, walls, various ways of working the walls. And really that's it. We've got the majority of what we're going to work with. It's going to be stringing together concepts of these foundational movements. So it's going to be the idea of creating a wall and then following with a thrust that then turns around and becomes a cut. You know, a cut that returns with a thrust, a wall that comes to thrusting higher, and in the end, it's going to be blending all those things together with the element of surprise of opening the fan. So we've got this, we've got a lot of the concepts of a knife, a lot of the concepts of the short stick, and then we have this kind of added flair of being able to open and close the weapon for whatever particular reason we might want to do. Mostly distraction is going to be that, but also ways to create flinches. So opening and slicing in towards somebody's space will tend to create a bit of reaction that we might want, or that blinding, deflecting, that blinding kind of motion. So I'm going to leave it there today. That's lots of stuff to kind of to work on. And I think what we'll do next week is we'll start looking at a bit of choy the foot footwork for people who haven't done the choy the foot footwork. We'll start to look at, there's going to be a lot of hook stance style work. There's going to be some beautiful 360-degree jump spins, because forms are supposed to help create dexterity. They're supposed to help create proprioception. They're supposed to help you with the idea that combat is moving and varying in 360 degrees. And so there's so many aspects to working on a form, between just core strength work and waist work, to footwork, to fighting theory, to aerobic work. It'll be a good solid workout to go from beginning, a good solid 2-minute-ish work to go through. So you're working that anaerobic into aerobic areas while you're working on a set. But also this idea of proprioception, that you should be able to turn and spin and move, but still know where your weapon is, still know where you are in the room. And that's some of the challenges as we move into working on the form. And we'll start having a look at the form next week. Okay, in the meantime, wander around your house, harass partners and people in the house, showing them your thrusts. Remember, you've got all sorts of variations on using the tip of the weapon, all those variations on using the handle of the weapon, the difference between percussive striking and returning with the weapon and cutting through with it. You've got your walls at multiple heights for your walls, and you've got this concept of working roofs, blocking on your angles. Okay, hope you have a good time playing around with the fan. Work on being able to make that transition into holding the fan so it stays open. You should be able to swing your fan around without it closing on you. So that's something to practice over the week, squeezing that together, making sure the sides of the fan are staying fanned open, and then being able to close that. And as soon as you close it, remember you want to come back to striking with your edges. Don't close the fan and end up with a weapon where you're now smacking with the flats. You've got to figure out how to make sure both of those parts work together. All right. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you have fun working on the fan. If you're looking for a fan, there's been a few people who have found some good ones online. I have some links to the fans that they found, so send me an email, send me a message. I can send those links out to you so you can find a fan to work with. All right, thanks for training hard today. Good. We will see you next week to play some more fan work. Have a great day.